Hey guys, hope you're doing well. It's me, Larry Boatwright, here with Alex Walton. Alex, welcome.
Hello. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad to see you. Welcome to Colorado, in town for a couple of days.
Beautiful to be here.
Yeah. So
And it's beautiful here as well.
What's that?
It's beautiful to be here, and it is also beautiful.
I thought you were saying
here.
I thought you said it was beautiful here.
And finally, as I was going to say, you are beautiful there as well.
Thank you so much. So tonight, we're going to have about an hour of conversation, and we wanted to give you an opportunity to get to know Alex. Alex is our new lead pastor as of, I don't know, 3 weeks ago or something. Somewhere in there. Alex is going to be starting technically next month. He's wrapping things up in New York, which we'll talk a little bit about tonight. And so we're live on YouTube. If you're watching live, it's live, and in the chat box you can put questions in there, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. We've already had a lot of people respond via text, and I can't remember the number to tell you to text. So maybe Teresa, you could throw that into my text box, and I'll know to do that. But you can text your questions in, and we'll try to field as many of those as we can.
I would look particularly brilliant if I just knew that number to text off the top of my head.
You would.
And it is 303. No, I have no clue whatsoever.
So let's just give everybody your cell phone number. So that, just kidding. Okay, well, we're really excited. Alex is going to be joining us next month, and in between now, when we hired him and when he starts, we were thinking of ways to help you get to know him. And our comms team had an awesome idea of what if we were to do sort of a live Q&A kind of webinar sort of thing. And so, I got that number. It is 720-730-8866. If you want to text that, 720-730-8866. You can text your questions for Alex, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. Anyway, our comms team had this idea to do this thing so that we can help you get to know Alex before he comes. And so we're going to talk about a number of things, from your family, your ministry background, who you are as a person, some fun questions too.
And then I'm just going to repeat all of these stories and bits of information the first few weeks of preaching. Anyway.
That's right. You're going to hear it
over and over.
He's a preacher, use the same illustration, the same story
every time.
Over and over and over. So again, that number is 720-730-8866. So get your questions in. Let's get started. Alex, would just want to help people understand a little bit about you. Could you just first sort of maybe tell us a little bit of your ministry background? What does ministry look like for you? Have you always wanted to be in ministry?
So bizarrely, I wouldn't have said I always wanted to be, but if you'd have asked me at 16 what I was going to do, even when I tried to find other career paths, there was this sense of this is what I was made to do. And my grandmother was one of those wonderful grandmothers. Some of you might be those wonderful grandmothers that prayed for me every single day. And she would always tell me this story time and time again. She said, I sat down with your other grandmother the day you were born. And she said, what's going to become of him? And she said, he's going to be John Billy Graham Wesley. Which was a lot to live up to if you're not familiar with those guys.
No pressure.
Yeah, fairly well-known people. And so she would tell me this every time we talked. This is who you're going to be. Now, it took me a long time to figure out that actually God only wanted one Billy Graham and only one John Wesley, and he made me to be myself. But there was this sense of this sense of calling. So even when I went through phases at 15, 16, where the stuff my friends at school were doing was way more fun than church stuff, there was still that lurking suspicion that this is what I was made to do.
Oh, okay.
That just would pull and pull and pull. So
you kind of wanted to see if there's got to be some other path for me, and no matter what you did, it sort of was just lurking in it.
I tried to be a banker for a while.
A banker?
But how
did that work out for you?
It didn't work so good.
Okay.
Someone said to me, I thought about law, and a friend of mine said to me, at least in law, there's some ethics. In banking, well, I hope there's no bankers listening. Do we have any bankers in the church?
Many.
We used to have many bankers.
Yeah, we used to until just this moment. Hey, I noticed, for those of you, you're probably noticing this, do you have a bit of an accent?
Yeah.
And I know you grew up in Birmingham. What was it like growing up in Alabama?
Alabama is a beautiful place, and I'm privileged to come from there. I can do a great Alabama accent.
Will you please do that?
So my wife would tell me never to
How
do an
about this?
American
I'll
accent.
say it this way. You do an Alabama accent, and we'll decide if it's great.
Okay. I'm from Alabama.
Wow. And well, that's been really great, guys. Good to talk to you. And
What did that do to the viewing numbers?
I'm sure they went down. So okay, joke's over. You grew up in England.
In England, Birmingham,
but
England.
it was Birmingham. So
Yeah.
England. What was it like growing up in England? What was sort of the spiritual climate growing up?
Oh
in
man,
England?
yeah. So one of the things that's interesting, if you think about church attendance in the US, and obviously that's different depending on the state. In England, it's way lower. So maybe 6% of the country attends church. Now, what that tends to mean is those 6% that do go take it very seriously.
Okay.
So there's less sort of sense of, well, this is a cultural thing, we go because of history. That's there in some places, but I grew up in a Pentecostal church where you went, for real.
Yeah.
So I think it made me aware in this, in this really incredible way that we're part of this spiritual world that we can't always see. And that we have this role to play in that. That was sort of ingrained in me. It was never just, well, church is a Sunday thing.
Right.
Church was always an everyday thing. Following Jesus was always an everyday thing.
Interesting. So it wasn't put on the Sunday suit and then
No,
I'll
it
talk
really
about it or
wasn't.
think about it next Sunday. It was a way of life.
Yeah, and maybe that wasn't true for every family. It's hard, but for my family particularly, and I would have said my church community, there was that sense of this is the central thing to life.
Yeah.
This Jesus thing permeates every other thing.
So tell me more about that. So you grew up in this family where this Jesus thing permeates everything. When did you have an experience of saying, I want to follow Jesus? Like when did that happen and what did that look like for you?
So I would have said, again, for those of you that know the Pentecostal church, a lot of traditions of raising hands in services to respond to like these appeals, bringing people out the front. Again, it may not be your culture, but if you've been in it, you know it. So that meant that I probably made that decision to follow Jesus at least 100 times before my 12th, 13th birthday, because I was never quite sure I'd done it right.
Right. I think a lot of people grow up with that sort of
I think they do, yeah.
theological underpinning of, I'm not sure if I actually said the magic words or did it exactly right or whatever. And so there's like this constant trying it again.
We feel like it's like a transaction, and we're used to transactions that take place, and we know that they've taken place. We take some money, we buy some goods, we have the goods in our hands, the transaction's done. This mystical sort of transaction, this thing that takes place of moving from kingdom of darkness to kingdom of light, that has a little bit more of a mystery to it. And so I think for me as a 14, 15-year-old, and 14, 15, you're very, you don't really get abstract thinking. So I wanted something concrete. But I was also going through this thing where, again, I had friends that were going out at 13, 14, 15, drinking, lying in fields. They seemed to be having a great time.
Right.
So I wanted to jump in with all the things they were doing. So there was that, and then there was this moment around 18 where it was almost like the drips got through to me, that God slowly drips at you sometimes. It's not like a big flood. It's like this constant calling.
They were kind of coming and coming and coming. And
yeah. And I remember part of it was I had some cousins that I really looked up to, a couple of years older than me. And this just shows like the power of invite sometimes. They said to me, do you want to come to a Bible study with us on Friday nights? Now, I had no real desire to go to any Bible study of any kind, but I did want to hang out with them.
Right.
So I said, yeah, I'll come. I even paid to go, which, who pays to go to a Bible study?
Somebody write that down. We should try that. That could be
a
little charge to come to a Bible study. I like that.
Sunday mornings, we could start this whole
$10 a person.
Revenue stream.
Yeah.
I love it. Reserve your seat. It's been tried.
So you wanted to hang out with these folks, and so you decided to go along.
Yeah, so I went along and started to see this life that they were living that was centered around this Jesus story. That their life made sense. It had this purpose to it. They had this pull of like, we're involved in something bigger than us. And it was too compelling. I couldn't stay away from it. So I suddenly found myself like following them, following Jesus, and then following him for myself.
Yeah.
And there was this just change that took place. I have this memory of walking to college, thinking, I don't remember the last time I swore or cussed. It just had changed. My language had changed. I hadn't tried to change.
Interesting.
I'd started this relationship with Jesus, and he was just working. He was just bringing something out. And so then just jumped into just anything ministry-wise I could do, anything that I could do to further the kingdom. I was like, I'm on board. Let's go.
Oh, that's really cool. So we'll come back to some of your ministry experience here in just a little bit, but would you just tell us a little bit about your family? You've got an awesome wife, 3 great kids.
Yeah.
Would you, I wish I could put a picture up, but I can't, but would you tell us a little bit
They
about
are
your family?
wonderful. They can check out the video. It's on the Facebook
It's
the
on
page
our
there. On the
website,
webpage,
yeah.
yeah. So I met my wife in Bulgaria, in Sofia. And I was there on a trip that I didn't want to go on. I was supposed to watch the British Open Golf Championship. It was a big deal. And I had a friend that said, no, I want you to come speak at this event. I really love you to make it happen. So I went out for 48 hours. And as I walked into the room, I think I got picked up at the airport and went and changed in the hotel room, walked down to the auditorium. And there was about 600 people there. And I saw this girl across the side of the road and side of the room and had this moment where God said to me, this is the woman you're going to marry. Now, I didn't know anything about her, and it sounds, I don't necessarily think God speaks in that way all the time, or maybe we're just not listening. But to me, it's happened maybe 1 or 2 times that it was that distinct. And
Did
so
it freak you out?
bizarrely very calm. If I'd have said it to her, I'm sure it would have freaked her out. I didn't lead with that. Like,
Yeah, dating tip number 1. Don't, if the Lord says, hey, you're going to marry this person, never go to her and say, hey, by the way, you're the girl I'm going to marry.
or him, just
Or,
either way.
whatever it is,
just,
don't do that. Not a good strategy.
it's like akin to saying, hey, I bought a wedding dress. Would you like to go on a date?
Right.
So I saw her. I guess I would have assumed she was Bulgarian if I'd thought about it, but it didn't matter. So during the time where in conferences, church services, they often say, go say hi to someone. I just beelined. I think I elbowed a girl out the way that was in front of her or something like that. And just,
Right.
I got to her and just said, hey, my name's Alex. It was very smooth. It was, I led with that. And so we started a relationship that started just by emailing each other and then visiting.
So was she from?
She was from Michigan.
From Michigan. Okay.
So we dated for about a year across the Atlantic. We met on the 18th of July, 2008. We got married on the 18th of July, 2009. It was very important that I got that date right.
Yeah.
And so, for us, that was just this wonderful way that God involved himself in our relationship.
So you were in Bulgaria by happenstance.
Yeah, it felt like it.
What was she doing there?
She was on a mission trip with her
She was on
church.
Okay, from Michigan.
From Michigan. So
What a weird, worlds apart, going to even a third place, met each other.
Yeah.
You had this sense that this was the one. You started this dating relationship, long distance, and then you got married.
Yeah, and she wasn't even at a church that did mission trips, really. She had felt just this compulsion, I need to go and get involved.
Okay.
She's very passionate about orphan care and things like that. So she just had this sense, I need to go and do something.
Right.
And so she almost forced her youth pastor at the time to run a mission trip just for her. It was just the 2 of them that went. It was just her and her female youth pastor went on this trip together. And so it felt like God pulling strings all the way in the background, which is just great. And so we got married 2009, lived in England for 3 years, and that was where Elena was born. And she was just this wonder that came along. And I honestly feel, for me personally, I didn't know what love was until I had a child. To me, there was something about seeing this thing and that just changed me in incredible ways. So much so that I was actually really concerned about having a second child.
How could I love this as much as I love the first one?
Yeah, I just wasn't sure it was possible. And then Gigi came along, and for those of you that are parents, you probably get this. Gigi isn't better than Elena, she's not worse than Elena, but she is distinctly different. And so the way that I love her is just different than the way I would love Elena. She just has all of her own personalities and quirks and things. And then Jude came along, and at that point, Jude. I think we should just sing the whole song, just duet that at the end. Stick around for a duet of Larry and I singing Hey Jude, Lennon and McCartney style.
Please don't make promises like that. Okay.
Viewership's just
By the way, I think we have 111 people watching now, so thanks for joining us again tonight. And again, if you have questions for Alex, 720-730-8866, you can text your questions there.
So Jude, who was named partly after the song,
Right.
and partly we always joke like it's because Jude's like the last book before Revelation. It's
Right.
like no more, done. It's the
Right.
end. Because having a boy is different. I was not prepped for that.
Yeah.
Just it's,
I only have boys, so it would be like if I had a girl, I would not be prepped for that either.
so I think the theory is boys are harder work early on, and girls are harder work later on. So Jude came and he climbed everything from 6 months old. He was in and out of his
Interesting.
chair. He could, I mean, again, climb. Just I think we'd moved to New York and been there a month, so he would have been about 10 months old, and he climbed up a ladder, and one of the bunk beds fell from the top at 9 months old, and rushed into the emergency room and stuff, and
Good
it was
night.
just terrifying.
And how old are your kids now?
So Elena's 8, Gigi's 5, Jude's 2. Should we sign that?
Sound is gone.
Sound is gone. Can't hear.
And we're back.
We're back.
And we're back. So sound is back. 118 people joining us. Sorry about that little technical glitch. So,
We handled it very well.
Yeah. So what were we talking about?
We were talking about my kids.
Yeah, and your kids. So
And we can talk about them for the next 45
okay.
minutes. There's so much material.
So we'll come back to that. I know people are interested in knowing about your personality and about your family. We're talking a little bit about your family, and we'll get back into some family stuff. Some of your background, we'll get into some of that. I think I would love to know, just tell us if you could describe yourself in 3 words.
Oh, man.
Just to sort of kick off the really getting to know Alex. 3 words that maybe sum you up or are important to you.
So, extrovert is one. I'm very much on the extrovert scale. And so sometimes people think about extrovert as being simply, do you like being around people? But I tend to think of it more as being, do you find people energizing?
Yeah.
So I'm very much, I can go from this conversation to, let's go find another conversation. Who
Yeah.
else could we go? Maybe there's some guys down the street that want to have
Right.
a conversation. So extrovert is definitely one. Passionate is another one. I'm very much like, once I find something that I really care about, I really just want to jump all in with it. So for me, that was one of those things was overseas trips. Just once I got involved in mission and seeing what God could do, I was like, I could give all of my time to this. I could
Right.
go anywhere. And then like I have this contemplative side as well. So like it doesn't come out in public, but this contemplative twist where I just love to just sit and think and read. And like I'm a huge reader. I love to just get into books. I always try and steal this C.S. Lewis quote. Apparently C.S. Lewis once said that he didn't believe that you could find a cup of tea big enough or a book long enough to keep him happy. And it's something that I have stolen for myself, because I could just sit and read for hours. Now, again, kids don't give that much time to do
Yeah.
that. But
It makes it a little bit.
so
You put an AirPod in with an audiobook going and just
Yeah.
smile and nod.
lock the office door,
Yeah.
just, noise cancelling headphones.
I love that. Alex, what South Fellowship, you started talking with us like in the last fall. What drew you to this church? Like you saw our listing, I'm assuming on church staffing or someplace like that.
Staffing.com.
There's hundreds of jobs posted
is,
there on a regular basis. So what caught your attention about South Fellowship? What started that journey all those months ago?
So I think we always have had this sense of wanting to belong to particular types of churches. Now, as well, for Laura would say definitely there's certain places that she would rule out. Birmingham, Alabama was never. She always felt that I wouldn't do well in a southern state. There was something about European politics or something like that she just said, I just don't think this is going to be for you. So we always had like some sense of there were places that were off the table unless God specifically said, this is where you're going.
Yeah.
And we felt that very clearly. Denver wasn't one of those places that was off the table. It's beautiful here, lovely. And then we love churches that are driven by values. So beliefs are really important. There's nothing wrong with beliefs. It's good to believe stuff. But one of the things we've always loved is the idea that how do you join a church community? If you're new to Jesus, you don't have any backstory there.
Right.
If beliefs are how you define yourself, then when you walk through the door, your automatic sense is like, well, I got to believe a lot of stuff to belong here. Mm-hmm. And if that comes first, that can be, it's as good as locking the door.
Yeah.
Values are a little bit easier. You can come without any concrete beliefs and be able to say, well, actually, there's values that South has, those 6 values, that I could get on board with those. I may take a while to figure out if Jesus is who he said he is.
Right.
But the values, I can live those out now.
And all of our values are rooted from the scriptures.
Yeah.
But someone maybe who isn't immersed in the scriptures, didn't grow up in the scriptures, maybe had a bad experience in church, they would see those and go, I can at least identify with these and get behind these sorts of things. And it gives them the opportunity to start to get to know the community here and to experience Jesus maybe in a fresh way.
And they're rooted in the Bible, obviously, but there's that sense of there's more overlap maybe with some of those than some of the more concrete beliefs. There's a sense of people that are still just investigating, could say, no, I'm in on that. So we loved the fact that the first thing we saw as we started to look through South's website, along with some of the values, was this sense of this is who we are as a community of people.
Gotcha.
As well as this idea of we want to live in the way of Jesus, with the heart of Jesus. That addition was really important to us. It's not just about finding a practice or a way of doing something.
Right.
It's about thinking through the motivations and things that sort of come up.
I love that. I would love to know, and I know people watching, you'd probably love to know, what's your background ministry? You grew up in Pentecostal, you've kind of went around, but maybe what's your work, your vocational, what have you done? And why lead pastor?
Oh, yeah, that was a definite, we'll get to that. That was a definite question. So the first ministry job I ever took was the church finance position. Which, if you know me, after
what's
a
the
while,
deal? So you tried to be a banker.
Yeah, and then I
you
tried
took
to
a church finance position. Okay.
Yeah, I'd been towards the place where they have loads of money, and then tried something where they had a lot less money.
Right.
But I had this, like, I just wanted to be involved. So that was what was available. I finished college and I just went to the church and said, is there anything that you would like me to do? You don't even have to pay me. I'll do it for free. I want to just be involved. I want to be in this environment. And then had a friend that pulled me into youth ministry. I'd never thought about youth ministry. I actually played the drums on stage at that point. I was one of the drummers, and bigger church, maybe 2,000 people. He came and he just said, you know what, I think you could be really good at youth ministry. And so I jumped in with that, worked with some young adult ministries. We did some really cool stuff with people that had never experienced Jesus before. And we were running about 75% unchurched people.
Oh, wow.
Just pulling 14, 15-year-olds off the streets. So
75% people who did not claim to follow Jesus.
Yeah, no connection whatsoever. Wow. So there were some nights where I remember standing in the church parking lot, and we'd have one gang over this side and one gang over that side, and there were just a couple of us just stood in the middle trying to keep the peace.
Interesting.
But again, saw some amazing stories come out of that. And then, the first time I actually did a paid ministry position as like a vocational position was when we came to America. Laura and I moved here in 2013, and I took a job at a Presbyterian church in Michigan.
Okay.
And that was like a whole, like the curve of learning just accelerates there. You just realize there's something different about doing it all day, every day.
Well, and you're also culturally, I mean, you went from one cultural context to another one, you know, new cultural idioms and new ways of thinking, and the northeast, upper northeast there, I guess it's a different culture.
Well, Midwest is very, I was very startled at how much money was available to run churches when we moved to America. That was a new experience. We'd run a youth program on a tiny budget, and I walked through the door and they said, here's $25,000, spend it as you will on whatever you students want to do. And so that was startling.
Yeah.
And so I did that quite happily for a while. But as we were there for a little while, they would give me opportunities to speak to the adult community. And I remember the first time I did that, the lead pastor just came to me and said, like, that was really good. I was not I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
That he felt it had a richness to it and a depth. And there was this change where after a while, as much as I loved working with students, two things started to happen. The things that I was doing with students, I actually started to think I would rather be doing these with my own kids. They're starting to get to that age where I only have so much energy. It was harder and harder to take students on some kind of retreat, doing whatever we were doing, and then be like, I can do that with my own kids the next weekend.
Right.
A bit more limited. But also those times of teaching and working with adults just felt richer to me. There was more of a pull. So we started to wrestle with that. And I sat down with a friend who's a coach, and he just said, he's one of those guys that, and I think you're probably a bit like this as well. He asked me 3 questions really quickly. He didn't give me a chance to overly think about it. He looked at me and he said, so, are you done with your job yet? What's next? What does your wife think? And I was like, wow, those are 3 really good questions.
Yeah.
I'm going to ponder for...
Pretty low-hanging fruit. Easy questions, right?
Yeah. And I said to him, I would love to be a teaching pastor or a pastor in a somewhat larger church, but I don't actually know if I want to be a lead pastor. There's a comfort with me. If I can find this compelling vision, I can jump on board. I can be the number 1 cheerleader as well. And I also had this hesitancy. A lot of lead pastors you meet are very lonely people. They feel a little isolated from their team and stuff, and there's this how do you have friendships and stuff?
Right.
Just there's that dynamic, and I love relationships. I hate to be lonely, so I went through this sort of struggle with that. And one of the things that really pushed me to jumping into a lead pastor role in New York was this sense of seeing some of the brokenness of leadership in the Christian world. That there's been ways that power has been abused by leaders. There's ways that people have led poorly and the church has paid for it, and our reputation worldwide has suffered at times. And I started to question maybe the fact that I don't love power and don't love the way that it's been used at times. Maybe that's a good thing in this time in the church's life. That maybe there's an opportunity there to find new ways to lead. And so that was exciting to me, that maybe God, the idea that God uses our weaknesses and stuff like that. There was an avenue there for me to be involved in something, and it wouldn't be me that said, this was always easy to me.
Yeah.
It would be something that God used me in spite of me at times.
Right. Yeah, I think one thing people are going to love about you is your humility. Although you're very confident.
I'm very proud of my humility. Yeah. I love it.
You're the most humble person you know, right?
I'm so good at it.
No, I do think that you carry yourself where there's an affect of humility, which I think is great, and you're very gifted. And those two don't. I mean, we see that rock star pastors shoot up through the ranks and build really large churches, and maybe they didn't grow along the way. They weren't formed toward wholeness in Christ, and then they made a mistake or some things unraveled, and then it played out nationally. And to your point, people who don't know Jesus look at those stories and go, see, that's what Christians are like. So could you tell us a little bit about what your own personal growth looks like? What does formation look like for you? How do you stay healthy? How do you make sure you're focused on the right things, that you don't get caught up in?
That's really good, yeah.
And it feels good when someone emails you and says, that was a great sermon, Pastor, or they come
so
up to
good.
you. How do you counter that?
And let me just say before I get into that doesn't mean, none of this means that we don't want emails that say that was a great sermon. Those are delightful to get.
I'll take them. He does not want those, I'll take them.
Okay. And so to touch on that, like a friend said to me years back, he said, I really feel like God gifts people and your gifting grows and it increases. But if you don't find ways for your character to grow alongside it, eventually there comes a point where something happens. And it usually ends badly.
Yeah.
And whether that's a relationship thing that happens, or it's a abuse of power thing, there's something that happens when you don't allow your character or encourage your character to grow alongside your gifting. So for me, I always know there's a couple of pointers that tell me I'm not healthy. So one is that I stop reading, and one is that I stop working out. Like the moment that I do neither of those two things,
yeah.
I'm like, there's something off. Like I love to read and I love to gain information and just experience other people's thoughts. And then I love working out and just that feels good to me. And so when I don't do those, I'm like, okay, something's happened here.
Yeah.
So those are like little pointers. For me, spiritual practice, the best spiritual practice, and this sounds really, again, maybe low-hanging fruit, is simply reading the Bible. And now that sounds obvious, but I started this practice some years ago. I had a friend who at 70 was reading through the Bible 5 times in a year. And so I worked it out. You have to do about 16 chapters a day. And I had this sort of, I'm quite competitive. I had this sense of, if he can do it, I can do it.
Right.
So I just thought I'm going to start doing it. So I'd start by getting up and I'd read 5 Psalms, and then I'd read a proverb, and then I'd read 5 chapters of the Old Testament. And then in the evening, I'd read 5 chapters of the New Testament. I was like, I'm just going to keep going with this cycle. And what was interesting wasn't particularly anything I noticed, but I had people come up to me in that season of life, and they'd walk up and they'd be like, "There's something different about you at the moment. Like, what's happened?
What's
like,
going on here?"
And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like the thing that people have been telling me to do all my life, I started doing it. Just this intentional practice of lots of reading, has been transformative for me. And it's ridiculous, right? The guy that's pastoring a church finds out that reading the Bible was a transformative process.
But but it's interesting as a professional Christian. I mean, we get paid to do ministry, do church. I mean, I can't tell you how many of my friends, and maybe you've experienced this too, that once they got out of seminary, they kind of stopped reading. They read enough to write a sermon or to, do the little devotional that they were expected to do. But as far as meaningful encounter with Jesus through the scriptures,
it's tough.
It's because it's hard sometimes to not make that just a professional thing.
It is,
right?
and even when you read it, meaning to just read it for its own sake, you quite often have that sense of, oh, that would work in a teaching one day. That could,
right.
You're
harvesting for future sermons.
And so that was an intentional practice for me to say, I am not going to use this for anything. This is just to read it for its own sake.
Right. Well, and one thing I've heard you say is that you try to move toward spiritual practices or formation practices that are opposite of how you're naturally wired. Why? And what are those?
So for me, again, extrovert, those of you that are extreme extroverts out there, I don't like stillness. I mean, you've probably seen me here just wobbling my stool a little bit. I like to be moving. It's hard for me to sit still. So for me, realizing that intentionally taking time to be still is an avenue to hear God well is really important.
Yeah.
It almost disempowers me, and I'm not always good at it. Again, I say it because it's important, and I try to do it because I think it has this incredible value, but I'm certainly not as good at it as I'd like to be.
That's why it's called a practice.
That's why it's called a practice. But there is this joy that comes when you can say, this isn't who I am naturally, and God can take that and use it. Now, I've not actually spent a ton of time thinking through what that would mean for the introverts out there. Does that mean that they have to go out and do practices that are opposite for them? I've just found that this works for me. It's maybe description, not prescription. This is what I found works.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Hey, just by the way, if you don't have the number to text a question, if you have a question for Alex, you can send that. We'll try to get to as many as we can. The number is 720-730-8866. I'm going to jump into some questions that I'm seeing people ask. What are you most excited? This is Brenna says, what are you most excited to do once you get settled in Denver?
So I love the outdoors. We were very excited about the mountains. So in terms of outside of the church sphere, we're excited to explore and take the kids just to see stuff that they've never seen before. For me, I landed here the first time we visited, and it was a landscape I'd never seen before. So even just looking east as you land and just seeing there's a flatness there that's just mysterious to me. I could see the curve of the earth. And then looking west and just seeing these peaks that just await exploration. That's really exciting. But Laura and I both have this just love of hospitality and love of being with people.
Yeah.
So just anytime we get a chance to make new friends, that to us is a big deal. So just in the process of figuring out a house situation and just the idea of seeing that space and saying, this is a space we can invite into.
Yeah.
And just, again, find those relationships for our kids, for us. We love the challenge of living away from family as much as that comes at a cost. Mm-hmm. It doesn't allow you to rely on your wider family as your only tribe. It almost says, no, you have to find a real tribe of people.
Yeah.
So that's an adventure to us.
I love
We're
that.
super excited.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned sort of in the interview process, you wanted to find some place and get there and stick.
Yeah.
You want your kids to grow up there and experience that. So Denver's a great place. A great place for that.
And there's people from all over the place. Like I'm still not sure I've met someone actually from Denver since I've been there.
They will tell you. People from Denver. I'm not originally from
You're
Denver.
not from
People
Denver?
will tell you, oh, I'm a native. You know? And there are some people have stickers on their cars that say native, so let us know that they're native. So
to let us know that they're better than us.
No, well, depends who you ask, right? It's like when I moved to Texas, the people had stickers that said I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as quick as I could.
Absolutely.
Alex, I think a question that several have been asking here is, what is the gospel? Mm. What is the good news? What is the gospel?
So isn't the wonderful thing about, I often think that the idea of the gospel is that it's like this multifaceted gemstone almost. It's got that richness to it. Mm. Because on one hand, there's this simple invitation, and we'll use that language, like we'll talk about like a gospel message or a gospel invitation.
Right.
There's this transactional sense that Jesus loved us individually and gave his life for us, that he valued us and he redeemed us. That language we used earlier, like that he moved us from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light, and that transaction happens in an instant, and yet it also works out all over our lives, all through our lives. So there's that beautiful part that Jesus gave his life to us. And that, to me, even though I've been through times that I'd call deconstruction, that maybe some of you have been through, where I've had questions and struggles, one of the incredible things is that feeling that Jesus that was waiting for me at 12 and 13 and 14 is still there every time and still present. And yet, there's also this idea that when Jesus first teaches, I mean, he almost just wanders out into the Galilean sort of countryside and starts proclaiming stuff. I mean, it's very stark the way he starts. He's just like, okay, I'm here, and here we go. Mm-hmm. And then he talks about the fact that this is the gospel of the kingdom of God, that there's the thing that isn't just about us, that the church is this vessel for good news that's supposed to change the world around it.
Yeah.
So that's also gospel too, as well, the idea that this kingdom, if a kingdom is your area of influence, you have a kingdom and I have a kingdom. It's those things that we get to influence in our day-to-day lives. And Jesus invites us to take all of that area of influence and bring it into his kingdom, and that kingdom expands and changes the world around it. So when he's asked, like, is this the kingdom of God? Are you the Messiah? He says things like, well, go and tell John the Baptist, the blind see, the lame walk.
Right.
All of these things are part of this gospel of the kingdom as well. So it's those different levels.
And how does that matter to the average person, living in Denver who doesn't know Jesus? Why does it matter? How does it matter?
Yeah, I think we're living in this season, aren't we, a little bit, where people want spirituality, but a lot of the time they want spirituality that doesn't come at a cost. And the gospel, even though it can't be earned, is very costly as well. There's this idea that Jesus said, pick up your cross and follow me. It's got that level to it of this is what you're participating in.
Right.
So I think the beauty of this Jesus story is it invites you into something that's bigger than you. As much as the wonderful joys of suburban Denver life are real at times, as we've experienced things like coronavirus, where we've had some of those things stripped away, for a lot of people, there's that sense of like, what am I living for? I mean, it's no coincidence that like suicide, depression, all of those things are up in this time of that we're experiencing. And so it's almost this message invites you into something bigger. And I think that means something to people. It's what we get to invite them into initially, at least. And there's more to it than that, but the invite starts because there's that sense of, same thing I experienced with my cousins. They're experiencing a bigger story than I am. What is it that they're tapping into that's bigger than the thing I've got?
Yeah.
As fun as it might be.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's Scott McKnight talks about the idea of we've sometimes mistaken salvation for the good news when it's actually salvation is a part of the good news, but it's kingdom and wholeness and shalom. That is, it's the gospel of the kingdom. It's the gospel of the kingdom, the gospel of the kingdom.
And Scott does a really good job of talking through that idea of like, there's, on one hand, we talk about the pleated pants crowd, which is maybe a slightly older generation, and on the other hand, the skinny jeans crowd, which is maybe generalized as a younger generation, and one has maybe talked more about the first thing you mentioned, and one has talked maybe more about the second thing.
Right.
But actually, no, they're both, it's not that one's right and one's wrong, it's that we're just seeing different facets and bringing the two together.
So let's talk about that. I'm glad that you brought generations up because, as you know, South is a very intergenerational church. It's one of the things I love about this church is we have little bitty kids running around. We have...
And mine will be there soon.
Yours will be here soon. Lots of energy. We have young adults. We have middle-aged people like me. We have people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. We have people up almost to 100 as a part of our community. And you know, I like to think that there are so many people who have been a part of this church for years and years and years, and we get to stand and benefit from their prayers and their investment. Could you talk just a little bit about the intergenerational... What draws you about that, and how will you bring those different generations together for one cause?
Yeah, and the intergenerational thing is magical to me. One of the things I loved about the church we were at in Michigan was we had a 9 o'clock service, which was maybe primarily older, more traditional service, and a second service that was more contemporary. And I used to love being with the 9 o'clock crowd. There was just this joy to it and this richness of this history of faith. So I think there's nothing wrong with recognizing that generations see things differently. I mean, that would be kind of crazy. Even just think through, we talk about a generation that's just sort of, we're seeing the last few people of the greatest generation, you know, the generation that saw world wars. They had this incredible focus on duty. Like they went to war across the other side of the world because it was their duty to do it. Vietnam, they went because it was their duty to do it. And there's a richness to that. There's a wonder to that modern generations don't always get. There's become more of a sense of, does it make sense to me? Am I doing it? I want to do it. If I'm going to do it, it's because it'll benefit me on some level.
Right.
So realizing that we're different and we all have different qualities, there's nothing wrong with that. I love the fact that we can tap into wisdom. One of the things that I always noticed with living in Michigan, New York, is there's a big snowbird culture, which maybe isn't quite the same in Denver. I don't know.
Yeah,
I've not really experienced it. But we would always joke that we would wait till people got to the time in life where they had the most money, the most wisdom, the most free time, and then we'd send them all to Florida. Or they would go to Florida out of choice.
Right.
And we'd lose all of that. So finding ways that we can just tap into that sense of experience is incredible. Yet at the same time, think about our physical bodies. Think about flexibility. You tend to lose that with age. Now that can be true about your ability to think about new ideas as well. If you allow it to be the case, you can get locked into this way of thinking. And there's this incredible invitation to people of all generations to say, well, no, actually always be exploring new ideas, always be trying new things. And so I think there's a compliment there, right? You know.
That's one thing I love about South. I mean, I think of Edith, Leland, who's a part of our church, who's 98.
That's awesome.
Hope I got that right. She has a YouTube channel.
That's amazing. I love it.
She leads Bible studies for other ladies.
That's so
I think that every church has work to do on this, but the promise is so good in this church of helping younger generations and seasoned generations work together. And our staff, you see a variety of ages on the staff, and I think it's important. And I would love to know what is something, if someone's older in this church and they want to know, is there still a purpose for me in this church? What would you say to them?
I mean, so one, a resounding yes would be the first thing. And I think it's again that willingness to say that age isn't particularly a factor in what you get to do. I don't think. I don't know. that you can always control that for every department or every person, but I think setting that as a culture and saying that no one's getting retired out of things, I would hope. And yet at the same time, it goes with that willingness to learn new things as well. My grandfather hated the idea of retirement, so he just kept going. And he was the guy that would create the print blocks for train timetables back before they were done on computers. So he would put all the numbers together. And he was so brilliant at it that they would send him the list and tell him to go prepare the print. And he would call them up and say, "You've got this wrong." And they'd say, "Well, what do you mean? You haven't seen the timetable?" He said, "No, let me just say this. There's no way that that train can get from that station to that station in that time. It just wouldn't work. It's not possible." And he'd be right every time. So like you see there's this richness to knowledge that, again, he was past this age where retirement should have happened. And yet the wisdom was still there. Yeah. And I had a friend in Michigan. He started several companies, and he's on his 4th or 5th one. And we were skiing one day, he's 77. And we were skiing, and he just said to me once, he looked at me, he said, retirement, the word comes from what they used to do to horses when they were basically so lame they couldn't work anymore. They would put them out in a field, and they were never expected to live like more than 2 or 3 months. Yeah. But they would basically just pass away. He said, "I have no interest in being a crippled horse." So he said, I've just decided I'm going to find what I love and find people I love doing that with, and I'm going to do it for as long as I possibly can.
I love that.
And I think that's maybe the culture we want here, right? That find where you love to serve. I took a 72-year-old guy on a mission trip to Romania with a bunch of students.
That's awesome.
It was wonderful. And so finding those ways to just say, come in and just join.
Yeah, I love that. I have a very deep philosophical question for you from Rhonda. What kind of shampoo do you use? She says, the hair is fabulous.
It is fabulous. I appreciate that, Rhonda.
That's your humility.
That's the humility. I'm going to answer this seriously because I think it's a serious subject. So
it's not to me, as you can tell. I don't have anything to work with.
Well, maybe that happened because you didn't take it
I
as
didn't
a
use the right
subject.
shampoo.
Use the right shampoo. God knew that you weren't taking it seriously. So my wife buys all of those things, and she researches all this stuff. So the hair is created by a brand called Pineapple Curls. That means that my hair actually smells of pineapples. But, again, I have no problem with that.
I don't even know what to say.
Good hair care starts with good products.
Okay. All right, and you can now buy that on our website. I'm just kidding.
And Larry and I will be taking a cut from each one sold.
That's right. It was just a priestly tithe. I've had a couple of people ask questions about what's your favorite Bible translation, or what translation do you use mostly when you're preaching?
Obviously the King James Version, because I'm English, and it's...
Because you're English and it came from England?
So I actually love the poetry of the King James Version, man. What an incredible translation. Like, it's got when you read the Psalms and some of the language choices and stuff, it's beautiful. But I landed on the NIV a while ago. I tried to make a switch to the English Standard Version. And it just irritated me that the verses that I had stuck in my memory weren't quite the same anymore.
Because you got used to the KJV memorization, and then all of a sudden it's kind of similar, but...
It just didn't work.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, like, I just... Finding ways to read lots of them. I mean, think about the Message, for example, which, okay, maybe is more of a paraphrase than a translation. But think about some of the language choices that Eugene Peterson made as he put that together. One of my favorite chapters is Romans 7 and 8. And in all the versions I'd read for years and years and years, it gave this idea of like those who live to the flesh, those who live in the flesh. And every time I read that, it gave me this sense of those who do sinful things.
Right.
And then it took Eugene Peterson to say something fairly close to verbatim of those who keep relying on their own moral muscle, their human effort. And it suddenly was this, and I'd been to seminary, I'd looked at Greek language, and it just was this realization, no, that's the tone.
The right perspective to read, yeah.
And it was just eye-opening to suddenly say, no, it's not about the sin aspect. It's down to this, are you trying to do this in your own effort? What's your power source? What's leading you to live this life? So I think just dipping into as many translations as you can.
Yeah, I think, I mean, gosh, I've been to seminary too. I still look at a bunch of different translations because each one lends itself to something different, you know?
Yeah.
And then the Greek is totally different. So I would love to know what could people in this church expect from you as the leader or the pastor in this church? How would you describe maybe your preaching style and kind of what matters to you there? And how would you describe your leadership style and what matters to you there?
So let's do the second one first.
Okay.
So I said a long time ago, I have no interest in being in a church. And I said this to you guys on the search team and the elder level. I have no interest in being in a church that doesn't see unchurched people come to know Jesus. I mean, that's what we're here for. And that really, it starts with you guys, because if you're not willing to invite people that you know and love, if we're not providing something that you're willing to say, I can do an invite to,
right,
we're missing something.
Right.
Because that's been the heartbeat of the church forever.
And it's a community effort, not just the professional Christians.
Yeah. You know, every one of you has a story. Every one of us has a story that gets to be shared. And you might not think your story is magical, but it is, because Jesus is involved in it. And so creating a culture where we take invite seriously. And one of the things I love about South, and this is something that it feels like is already ingrained in it, is the missional aspect. So to me, those overseas experiences and those local experiences were so transformative.
Yeah.
Asking those questions of how can we impact the world around us? Why is the world different because South is here? I think we've all sadly been in churches or had church experiences where we've said if we close the doors, we'd be sad, but the community wouldn't know we'd gone. And one of the things we loved about South was with things like the food pantry, the coffee shop, the early learning center, it was quite clear that if South wasn't here, a whole bunch of people that may never come into the building for a church service would be deeply impacted. And that might be as simple as my favorite coffee shop is no longer there. And it might be as serious as my child isn't being cared for and we're not getting groceries this week.
Right.
So we love that aspect of South. And so in terms of preaching, expect to hear that a lot. But I love the magic of, someone said that there's something about the Bible that it's got this shallowness and this depth to it at the same time. That you can splash around in the waters and learn almost everything. You can learn the whole message of the Bible within 30 seconds. And yet you can keep studying it every day and still be finding new intricacies to it. So I love when we can take a passage and just play with what's behind it, what's the context, what's the history there, and start to think about what in everyday life do we already know well that makes us or helps us understand this a little more. So just play with some of those connections and stuff.
So what are you hoping the average person who, maybe if you take three groups of people who curious, doesn't know Jesus, someone who would say they know Jesus, but it's sort of a peripheral thing, or someone who's deeply immersed in the Jesus story, what are you hoping the three of those different people take away from a Sunday that you're preaching?
So I have always loved, and this is a me thing, again, maybe description, not prescription, but I have always loved the aha moment. N.T. Wright talks about that, the theologian, that there should be this sense of aha when we read and when we learn together. So I love to create those moments for people. So for someone who's been following Jesus for a long time, one of the things that's been really rewarding for me over the years is to have people just that have been in church for a while come and say, wow, that was a different perspective on that passage. I hadn't thought about it from that point of view before. I think that creates an opportunity for you to think about Jesus in new ways and maybe a freshness to faith. For people that have never really stepped into this thing, that are just playing around on the edges, I always love to try and think about my role as a navigator or a translator, maybe is a better term even. So we have all these words that mean stuff to us that have been following Jesus for a while. We use them because they make sense, because they describe the world around us. Words like sin and righteousness. And yet, to a whole group of people, those words don't mean anything.
It's very insider language
Very
that
insider,
makes you feel
yeah.
very alienated if you walk in and go, I don't know what. Is this a cult?
Yes, absolutely. And so sometimes that can be as simple as we'll throw out something like, Paul says this. Well, to a person that's new, who is Paul? I have no clue who Paul is. I've never heard of this guy before. I'd like some more information. Why should I believe what Paul says? Why does it matter what he thinks?
Right.
Why does his letter from a couple of thousand years ago have any impact on my life today?
Right.
So being able to just walk people through some of those ideas and start to give them some of the framework to potentially believe is just one of the roles that I think we have every time any of us step on to the platform or
Right.
behind a camera or in front of a camera.
What's your favorite verse in the Bible?
Oh man, there's so many good ones. I think I would land on Ephesians chapter 3 as a whole sort of swathe, but once it gets down to verses 17, 18, and 19, the idea that, that God's love at its heart is not understandable just by information. It's you have no idea how deep, how wide, how vast his love is for you. I think there's something incredible about Paul's language all the way through Ephesians. There's been others that have really stuck out to me. Right now, one of the phrases, the verses that's just coming back to me over and over again is Psalm 70, verse 5. It's just this idea of, I am weak and lonely, come to my aid, God. This is something we talked about. Anytime you pastor a church community, you realize you're doing something that's bigger than your own life can handle.
Yeah.
Like I in my own strength, can't give spiritual life to hundreds of people. You can't do that. None of our staff can do that. Even combined, that's beyond us. And realizing that we don't have to be the smartest people in the room. We have to lean into Jesus' good leadership, and that's our role. That verse has just been one that's just come back to me over and over again. So I think Jeremiah 29:11 at different points has spoken to me, whether it's always in the right context, I don't know. Sometimes I've just appropriated it for me out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's the Bible, isn't it? You could go on and give multiple.
So some people are asking about being a lead pastor. Have you been a lead pastor before? If yes, tell us about that. If no, why do you feel like being a lead pastor in this season is right for you? And then could you tell us why you sensed a call to leave and come here?
Yeah, so we've been in New York for a couple of years now, and that same conversation over coffee with a friend who's a coach that sort of pushed me to look at new opportunities. We ended up in New York at a church that I went to be a teaching pastor at, and the first year was rough. There were lots of drama, things going on with different people within the church. And the lead pastor ended up announcing he was leaving after 80 days. We'd been in New York, we moved our whole family there, and so they said, well, will you take his job? And I said, maybe. So I started off, I said I'll do it as an interim, and then said we would stay for a year. But we were really aware that church wasn't a fit for us. So I've been a lead pastor for around a year now. But it was a church environment that was a fair bit smaller than South. A lot of either part-time or voluntary pastoral staff. And one of the things I really thrive on is collaboration. So I'm not, again, personality extrovert. I'm not the sort of person that can sit in a church building by themselves for hours and feel happy or feel fulfilled. I love the conversations that come up from a staff team and the way that we can pool our resources and just create something wonderful. So to me, there was always that sense of this isn't going to fit.
Right.
It might fit for someone else really well. And so we were aware of that. And I think in their hearts, that community was aware of that as well. That this. So when South came along, I was like, wow, there's this incredible team of people in place. I even asked the question a couple of times, do you even need me? You guys are, you're rock stars. It's amazing. And so the idea that I could jump in with a team of people that really love Jesus and really love the community and just see what happens together. So I'm super excited about that.
That's awesome. Alex, we're running out of time. We only have a minute or two left. I think
We've got a Hey Jude rendition to do, though.
we'll do that one off camera. How about
Off camera, okay.
We'll have a technical glitch and cut away before we do that. We could
We could
technically
do it
do
from
that
the
sometime.
platform sometime.
Sometime we
just-
could do that. No promises, but that might happen. I would maybe two questions. I've had a number of people ask questions about women preaching, and we've had a number of women preaching in the last 18 months or so. How do you feel about that, and why does it matter?
So I love that. So one of the things I love is, and again, people have a whole diverse view of how men and women participate in community together and what's right and what's wrong. One of my joys is seeing in the Bible, seeing the role of women and women in places of leadership and teaching, and you see that in places like Romans chapter 16 and stuff. But so for my daughters, who are dreaming about how they're going to impact the world right now at 8 and 5, and they've got all these different ideas. I've been in church cultures where they would have been told, well, you can do that by singing or playing the piano, or you can do that by doing a dance or something like that. For them to see strong female leaders that are getting to grips with the Bible and sharing, and I've got to hear some of Yvonne's sermons, and you know, just some of that, the wonder of them seeing that is just, to me, this incredible thing. And also just seeing the impact that female leadership has had on my own life. I had a female executive pastor that I worked for about 4 years. And I honestly believe I learned more about leadership from Ellie than any person I've ever met. So God used her so richly in my life. Now, we were in a church where women weren't allowed to preach. She never got to speak from the pulpit. God used her in my life in incredible ways. And so the idea that there's women whose voices we'll get to hear from the platform here that might be doing that for my daughters down the line, and maybe even for my son down the line, you know, because again, I learned so much. I just think there's just a beauty to that. So that's super exciting.
That's awesome. Alex, thanks for carving out the time to do this.
Thanks for having me, guys.
I want to ask a final question, and we have a lot more questions that people sent in. We can't get to those. Maybe we'll do it again sometime, or maybe we can find some way to continue this conversation.
Some technology.
I would love to know, as people are asking this, how can we, as a church community, help welcome you guys well?
Oh man, what a delightful question. So we love hospitality. We love having people over to get together for meals. That's just one of the ways that we're so excited to get to know people. We'll definitely be calling a few people, asking to help move boxes into a house in a few weeks.
If you know the date on that, will you let me know so I can go and take vacation?
I will absolutely tell you a different date so that you'll be here.
Oh no, you changed the date and I am here, but my back, see?
Yeah. I tell you, yeah. We'll find some lighter boxes that will be perfect.
Right. Oh, man.
We'll find something for you to do. So those would be just a couple of things that come to mind. My kids are longing to meet other kids within the church community. So if you have elementary and downwards kids, we would love to spend time with you and build relationships with them. Again, we're hoping this is a long-term thing. So we want our kids to be talking about other kids they met 20 years ago in church, and so that's the hope.
That's awesome. We're excited for Alex to join us. He and his family are going to be joining us in early September. And you guys are on Facebook, so you can look up Alex or Laura.
Can. Add away. And I will say this, the accent gets easier to understand with time. Just sometimes takes a little while.
It takes a little, but it makes you sound really intelligent, so.
It does make me sound really intelligent.
So follow up, if you have questions, you can hit up Alex or Laura. Let's welcome them well. Let's be excited and be praying over the next few weeks as he's closing out his time in New York and working out some of the logistics that it takes to make a cross-country move. As we all know, moving can be stressful, so we'll be praying over he and Laura and their 3 kiddos as they make that transition. And additional questions you can keep texting in. We'll archive those, and we'll see if there are some other ways that we can get to some of these. And it's been a pleasure. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight, this Tuesday night. It's been a lot of fun. And
thanks guys.
Again.
See you soon.